You resist temptation admirably.
Temptation?
The key.
Well, why would I want it?
For many reasons. There is, in some cases, a psychic need to loose evil upon the world. And we all of us carry within us a desire for death. You fear the panther, yet you're drawn to him again and again. Couldn't you turn to him as an instrument of death?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, those in attendance. You're listening to that Twilight Zone show, The Zone. Did I?
That was fine.
This is Colin Hall here with David Joshua Lawler.
Thank you for that elegant introduction, Mr. Hall. Welcome to that Twilighty Zone. God. You know, this is like the first time we're recording this, and this is kind of a test run, actually. But the name of the show is That Twilighty Show About That Zone. And tonight I'm with my very good buddy, Colin Hall. How are you? It's been a while.
Doing very well. I'm happy to be here.
Where the hell have you been?
Harlem, Yonkers, not too much other places, but I'm maintaining, surviving.
You don't write and you don't call.
Limited accessibility, but a lot of time. You shall see me more for the upcoming 2016.
Tonight we are discussing episodes 9 and 10 of the original Twilight Zone series, created by Rod Serling and broadcast November 27th and December 4th in 1959. Perchance To Dream and Judgment Night. These are lesser-known stories in the wide expanse of the Twilight Zone universe. But before we begin, I just want to say this is the first episode, technically, that we're recording for this run. And we will be covering every single episode, all 156 of them, and it will be a very big chore. But we will have different guests every time. Luckily, as I came up with this idea, it was around time Thanksgiving. Colin was due to come over anyway, so I kind of stuck him with this chore. So when Time Life, home video, released the show on VHS in the 80s and 90s, I attained a VHS clamshell tape of Perchance To Dream. I never saw the episode before then, so I don't think it played in syndication all that often, which is a shame because it is an intriguing episode about what I can only describe as a mental illness. You have a man played by Richard Conte who is convinced he will die if he goes to sleep. Right? That's like the first thing we noticed. He pops into this doctor's office, a psychiatrist's office, right? And he's completely troubled.
I thought you said you were tired.
I am. I'm the tiredest man in the world. You all know how many hours I've been awake? 87 hours. Almost 4 days and nights.
And you can't go to sleep, is that it?
No, Doctor, not can't. I mustn't. I mustn't go to sleep because if I do, I'll never wake up.
Unfortunately, in life, you have people that are insomniacs who can maybe kind of relate to that episode. But as you know, reality sets in. If you don't go to sleep long enough, you will die inevitably anyway. You speed up the process of death if you're not already dying from something.
Right. There are certain mental illnesses that can be attached to a lack of sleep if you don't have sleep.
Yeah, insomniac, definitely.
Well, I don't know that he is an insomniac per se. I think he can sleep. I think he's just afraid to sleep. Because if he sleeps, he believes he will die.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're all going to sleep permanently at some point anyway. And then when you do that, you're speeding up that in which you are trying to avoid. You're helping to, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, because the more you're devoid of sleep, the closer to you are to death.
But also, I sort of see sleep as kind of death. Sleep is kind of like death. When you die, you sleep forever. It's just not waking up. That's all. That's sort of how I see it. I see sleep as mini deaths every night. When you go to bed, you're lying down in your bed. Your bed. What does a coffin look like? When you look at a coffin, it looks like a little bed, doesn't it?
Yeah. The only thing is coffins close and beds usually don't. But a bed is like a pre-coffin. It's like being on a casket.
Also,
you're laying on
coffins.
A casket
I
instead
just
of being
want to throw that out there.
Instead of in something.
They actually lock coffins. Why do they do that? That's creepy.
No, well, the body's dead. The person is not expected to rise and come back out.
Yeah, but they lock them expecting that these people are going to get up. And the thing is, if people think you're dead, they put you in a coffin and they lock it. You're going to die if you can't get out and you're not really dead.
Well, yeah, inevitably, we all go sooner or later anyway, but you hope that the person is actually gone if you're inside of a casket or a coffin.
We can only hope.
That, I mean, in some cases, people die such a horribly violent death that there's nothing to even put in a casket.
Yeah, no open casket there.
Right. Sometimes there isn't anything to view, depending on if it was in an explosion or something.
So he is tormented in his dreams by a sexy cat lady named Maya, played by the very beautiful, the very stacked, if I may, Suzanne Lloyd. She's a very sexy woman there. So he goes to see a psychiatrist.
Gorgeous creature.
Right. He has a funny exchange with the psychiatrist. His psychiatrist seems to have a sense of humor. And he tells this horrifying story about, he goes to sleep, has a dream about the cat lady at some kind of burlesque show at a carnival or something, right? An amusement park.
Yeah, definitely.
And then later on, the woman comes to haunt him some more, and she drags him into like the fun house or something, right? With weird mirrors.
Definitely a fun house.
And then
fun house, like a haunted fun house, but
Right. And then after that, she takes him on a roller coaster.
It was the kind of place you see only in nightmares. Everything warped and twisted out of shape. But it was real, too. Very real.
Hurry, hurry, hurry. This is where you get those big prizes. 6 shots for a dime. Hit the bullseye and you get a Koopy doll. How about it? Come on. 10 cents. 10 pennies.
Hurry, 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 friends. The show is about to begin. See a dance, see a wiggle. The most sensational, electrifying exhibition since Little Egypt. Now, friends, you're not going to be able to see anything standing out there. You've got to get down close. That's the idea right over here, right down close. That's it, friends. Now, not too close. Let's not trample each other. Now, friends, you say you want fat ones? We got them. You say you want thin ones? We've got them. Blondes, brunettes, redheads, and believe me, folks, if they ain't up here, they ain't worth looking at. And now, to give you a little demonstration of what you're going to see on the inside, Maya, the cat girl. Come on, baby. We know you're modest, but why should the folks out there take my word for it?
I've always been scared of roller coasters. I can say it safely. I've only been on one roller coaster, I think, in my entire life, and that was at Opryland in Tennessee when I was like 13, I think. And it wasn't even the big one. It wasn't even the big one. It was sort of like a mid-sized roller coaster, but it sort of took you on a pretty fast trip, and it kind of scared me a little bit.
I see.
So the thing, Richard Conte in the episode claims that he's 35, but he looks more like he's 55 to me. But that could be due to his condition. He has a bad heart, and he can't have any excitement, he says. A very weak heart. Also, if I may, like in 1959, people lived a lot harder back then. They weren't exactly health conscious, so a lot of people who said they were 55 probably did look a lot older than they do.
It is possible. There are more products out here to
You and I are in our 40s. We're in our 40s, and we look a lot healthier than he does at 35.
You're probably right, Lawler. I would imagine that you're right. Then again, maybe he wasn't really the age that they say he was. I could have just scripted to make it look, make it look better. But
should probably look up his biographical information to tell for sure. Todd Vanderweff at the AV Club. Okay, the AV Club did some really nice write-ups of the Twilight Zone that I read voraciously a few years back. They're no longer doing them because they finished the run of the show. But I always kept the complete collection of Twilight Zone episodes, so I'm always watching them constantly. But he wrote about Perchance To Dream. What makes it so interesting and what makes it a good episode of television is the way that it doesn't just allow itself to be trapped by the stagey setup of the story. The most obvious example of this is the way that Beaumont's script takes us into the man's nightmares and lets us see what he sees when he closes his eyes. But there are also several nicely handled directorial and cinematic flourishes within the psychiatrist's office itself as the camera swoops in on the man's face, or whip pans from a painting of a boat he says he can make move if he thinks about it hard enough, back to his face. The direction by Robert Florey makes the office seem small and confining, the sort of space that might belong to a man's nightmares, which is exactly what it is. We learn at episode's end the twist of it. We'll get to the twist in a second, but the Twilight Zone takes something that might have been confining, the one-set nature of the premise, and turns it into something that would work only in filmed art. Perchance To Dream was the first Twilight Zone episode to be written by Charles Beaumont, who is an incredibly fast, extremely prolific science fiction writer. I have a couple collections of short stories written by Beaumont. I believe Perchance To Dream is in one of those collections. Many of those stories were adapted into Twilight Zone episodes. I read once that Charles Beaumont also had a fear of roller coasters, and that's why he wrote the roller coaster scene into the script. So what did you think of the episode, Colin?
Well, pretty much... I am a general Twilight Zone show, episode fan. I like the show very much in general, and that to me was just another. I can't say that there's too many Twilight Zone episodes that I can say that I haven't liked. I mean, there's some I like better than others, but I would say that one definitely resonated as one of my favorites, and I believe I've even seen that once or twice many years ago, but just not recent. But that episode looks very familiar, as I don't know all the Twilight Zone episodes, but that one is I think I crossed paths with this story many years ago, 90s or 80s or something.
So this is interesting. You have a situation where you have a recurring dream that involves a specific character, namely this Maya chick. Now, we know the twist, and for the purposes of this podcast, I would assume that you would watch it. The twist of the episode is that he's dead before he even gets to tell the psychiatrist this story. He comes into the office, asks if he can lie down. The psychiatrist says yes. And from that moment on, he's dead, just like that. We go back. We go through his whole episode, his story, talking about his dreams. But that's all of this, I guess, is going on in his dream right before he dies. Because he tells the guy, I'm going to die if I go to sleep. There he is. He's flat out dead. What causes him, I guess, to die ultimately is that he gets up because he believes the doctor can't do anything to save him, goes out, he sees the secretary, and the secretary looks like who?
Exactly like Maya. I'm not sure. I don't know what her last name is. But
Maya the Cat Lady, you might call her.
Yes.
She's a very attractive secretary, and I wish I had some psychological ailments. I'd love to visit him. But he takes one look at her, drops dead, I guess. Or no, he goes smashing through a window, basically, in his dream. It doesn't look like it's real anyway. He goes smashing through. How many people go smashing through a window? But we
I
fade.
think it would have looked more realistic if he had jumped after he opened the window.
Yeah,
instead.
he just went smashing straight through. People have done that.
But if you are in real life going through what this man has gone through, you would be surprised what your body's adrenaline and what your testosterone can, in extreme happiness, misery, fear, or anger, you would be surprised what you could, if you're in distress in any way, or if you're even extremely excited in happiness, it could cause you, that could be extreme happy, like I said, fear, anger, or confusion. You just, if your body's tensed up that much, the adrenaline, testosterone for men, you do some incredibly surprising things, good or bad, depending on what is occurring at the time. There are people that used to do stuff like that, I think, during the Depression. That's part of the reason why henceforth it's called Depression. Not just the financial, problems that you have with the Depression, the economic, but also the suicides that come with it and all the other miseries that come with it.
Right. This is all like post-war, part of that kind of thing. And it's the next episode that we're going to slip into, but this is post-war America, 1959, which was only 14 years after the war ended.
Right before Vietnam.
For me, it's an interesting psychological exercise that you don't really see in television shows of that time. Nowadays on television, they get really into your head all the time. A lot of things are psychological. But I never knew of a TV show this early on that was made at that time that actually explored those issues, those kind of night terrors. Well,
Twilight Zone would be a pioneer into the psychological realm of the human experience.
Very much so.
You would definitely have to call that a pioneer. It was ahead of its time, as you could typically say. That show definitely, just like Star Trek, which came out a few years.
Well, yeah,
not far behind it.
Star Trek came out.
When this ended, a couple
6 years after that, I think.
Yeah, 6 or 7. Yes.
So okay, now it's time to move on to our second episode, Judgment Night. And as written by Rod Serling, the creator of the show, it's pure revenge fantasy. That's really all I saw it as. These are punishments doled out to the gods in mythology. Certain gods, the pile of titans at the bottom of a pit, and demigods were often punished in horrific, repetitive means. And that's what I thought about when watching Judgment Night. You have a conspicuously German man aboard a British passenger liner. The year is 1942. We're already at war, but nobody seems terribly worried about this. This German man tries to alert passengers and crew of the boat that a U-boat is casing them, a German submarine, with the intent of attack. The boat is attacked. Everybody's killed, including him. And just at the moment of death, the story loops itself in time, and he's alive again at the start of the action. So his punishment appears to be death and destruction over and over again. It's then revealed that he was the captain of the U-boat heading the attack. So these are the consequences of war.
There be no wolf packs converging on a single ship, Major Devereaux. The principle of the submarine pack is based on the convoy attack.
The gentleman is quite correct. Our principal danger would lie in a single submarine.
I'll tell you something. I'd rather they go after us with one of those pocket battleships. That you can see. Not a skulking, crummy tin fish a couple of miles underwater.
If you're being followed, you'll see the sub, Mr. Potter. It will surface. They won't use all of their torpedoes on us, not when they can sit at 1,000 yards and shell us with impunity and sink us at will.
It's a horrific, it's letting you know that, I would say this story has like a moral, how should I say, the moral of that story is to not necessarily embrace war. I mean, it's something that, and then once you don't embrace war, it gives you that much less of an inspiration probably to even really join any of the branches of the military. If you understand what war really is, you really should not embrace really signing up voluntarily unless you like war. If you're prepared for that and that is really your thing, which I don't think any human being in their right mind would, but that to me, what I saw was an anti-war message. If that was allowed, it's something that
kind of I wasn't. I don't know if I go so
punishment for
far
war
as
is
to
one
call
thing,
it
but it also
anti-war,
means
though.
don't get involved if you don't have to.
I don't know that I would go so far as to call it anti-war. I would say because we're living in different times now. We're obviously living in different times.
Yeah, now. But war is still
now,
with us,
I
though.
remember I did a podcast with Andrew, with my friend Andrew, and I talked about how we seem to not be able to come to terms with the fact that we have enemies anymore. And we can't come to terms with the fact that there are people out there that hate us. So we're having a hard time labeling them as villains because everybody wants to be open-minded. Everybody wants to be liberal about this. This is an interesting quote from Todd Vander Weff, also from the AV Club. He wrote, Nazis, of course, remain among the few acceptable villains for American films. Since the fall of communism, it's become harder and harder for American movie makers to come up with villains that will play to a broad global audience without isolating anyone. See? Nazis work well because saying you sympathize with Nazis isn't going to win you friends. At the same time, this has allowed Nazis to become more and more cartoonish, more like video game villains to be mowed down in waves by the hero. And this is where we pick up. Because of the new times, because of these new times that we live in and all these new fresh faces, we don't have villains like that anymore. I mean, they can continue to remain villains, but they're not going to be what we have seen in the last 15 years, unfortunately.
We have terrorism now, so the world is, hating to say it, it's not something that I positively embrace, but it is yet, I believe, a necessary truth and reality. As a person who believes in the Bible, I don't know if I would exactly call myself a Christian. I'm just someone who believes in God and the Bible. And from what I'm seeing, I know that we're in a period of revelations. I can't say which exact chapter or page or what paragraph, but I can see by the signs and times we're living in, the way society is now, the temperament of the world's population. I would definitely say we're in those last days described by the Bible, and there'll be war and rumors of war. And inevitably, just as the Twilight Zone in its days when the show was in production, when it was, and even in syndication, when you see the Twilight Zone can, in a way, it can kind of, you can get some messages from it that are important even in today's times because of the morals of this story or the immorality in a story, depending.
I was amused by the episode because it's nice to think that those who were your enemy are somehow being punished in a hell for eternity to the same fate they consigned to so many other people. He dreams, or rather, he is constantly taken back to the place where he is punished, a place where he destroyed people, and he is one of them. He is one of his own victims. But I thought that this Twilight Zone took a different tack because it humanized this particular Nazi. If we look at him and understand, we don't necessarily see an evil man. We see someone who was at one time our collective enemy, not just him, but everything he stood for. We have difficulty killing our enemies when we humanize them. We want to think our enemies are monsters. That makes it easier for us to do our job. That's how I see it. He has fears the same as us. He's scared to death on that boat, right? He would be the same as anyone else out there.
Potter! Miss Stanley! Major Devereaux! Captain! Captain! Stewart!
Yes, and maybe perhaps that's why the Nazi Party existed in the first place.
And I'm not sure, Colin, but I think that might have been the first time we ever saw it from that point of view in a TV show.
In a TV show of that time, but now you have people that seem to...
You got to remember, this was 15 years out from the end of the World War II.
Yeah, that's a decade and a half. Like I said, that's a very... Twilight Zone in general had very advanced concepts, and that episode was no different in comparison. But like I said, Twilight Zone, when you look at the whole thing, is coming from perspective of a man who was actually involved in the war. This is not just when we heard about it.
Yes.
As a person who was involved in the war himself.
And yeah, back then, because
it put so much more life into what he
nowadays
on the
our
show.
rich and powerful celebrity types don't go to war. I remember it
That's
was a
the
very
truth.
big deal when Elvis was drafted and he went to war and he fought in the Army. He interrupted his musical career to be in the Army, and then he came back. He survived.
Elvis Presley was in a war?
Yeah, he was in...
Well, thank you
He
for
served in the Army.
I was not aware of
Baseball
this.
players, other celebrities, writers, producers, actors, all served in the Army back then. This was a war that you conscripted soldiers to appear in that war, to be drafted or whatever, or perhaps they joined sometimes. Nowadays, they don't do that. They don't do that. They send our boys out there and they talk about them, about how they love the troops and they support the troops. You know, if you really support a troop, seriously. And I know I'm probably a big hypocrite for not being in the Army. A lot of my family died in the Army fighting for this country. But the thing is, if you do support the troops, pick up a gun. That's really all I'm saying. But a number of war episodes were made for the show. The Purple Testament, which we also watched. The Passers-by, A Quality of Mercy, and they tended to lend a sympathetic ear to our enemies that, really, in the end, we're all just pawns to be moved around on a bloody chessboard.
I'm glad that you understand that notion. See, I consider that the battle between good and evil, and sometimes the lines get blurred because your enemy can look at you as just as much evil as we look at them. And if we understood their motivation and concept, maybe sometimes the enemy is the way they are based on some sort of a fear that might be a lot more rational if we understood their side of the story, and we might understand, and perhaps they never even wanted to be our enemies. Maybe they were just
being moved around.
A fight that knew that they knew was going to ensue between us and them. They just decided to strike first, making them appear to be the evil. But if there was there might be propaganda in media in their countries.
Or if I may, the other way around. Sometimes we strike first.
Right. Then and see that
like Vietnam.
Exactly. So when war in itself is an evil, regardless. In fact, I've heard from Oliver Stone, another war veteran. He was in the Vietnam War. And he made the very famous film Platoon, similar to Rod Serling making his Twilight Zone episodes. He was a war veteran, World War II. And he, one of his quotations was in Platoon, the first casualty of war before anyone actually dies is innocence.
Absolutely.
And that's ever so true, not only in war itself, but as soon as you initiate anything toward war, because it's a very uninnocent gesture to have human beings killing other human beings really over anything, but especially if your home is not being invaded by an enemy and you go to somebody else's home and invade theirs and you're shooting down their people and your people are getting killed in the process. That is an evil. And the Bible, excuse me for going on so much about that, but that's a big thing with me. The Bible says that we struggle not just with flesh and blood as mankind, but with spirits and principalities, which that explains so much of why good and evil exists, and it explains death in so many ways. Not all people die violent, but enough of them in this world do, and a lot of them too early, All
right. I want to thank Colin Hall for joining me for this episode of That Twilighty Show About That Zone. Next time, I will be discussing And When the Sky Was Opened and What You Need with Mark Giacomo on That Twilighty Show About the Zone. Thanks for tuning in, and try to get a good night's rest tonight.
Good night.